Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are.
Welcome to the Books That Make You show. I'm your host, Desiree Duffy, and we're talking about books that make you explore themes of race, gender, and identity while being captivated by a love story that transcends time. And it just might take us on a mystical and spiritual journey as well. Kieren-Paul-Brown has gained quite a reputation for his unconventional style and unapologetic approach to social themes. As a British author, observing American culture from an outsider's perspective, Brown infuses his work with a blend of empathy, critique, and some rather sharp insights. So prepare yourself, my friends. His latest novel is called N-Word. In it, Antonia, an 85-year-old white woman, is reincarnated into the body of Cara, a young Black social media influencer. And here we are, Kieren-Paul-Brown. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, and that was an absolutely fantastic introduction. That was brilliant. That was wonderful. I'm great to be here. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to have you because the reason that introduction was so awesome is because you're so awesome and you're provocative, but yet thoughtful. And there's a sensual aspect to your writing. I mean, really, you kind of bend a lot of genres. It's a thriller. It's got elements of historical fiction. So let's dive in. I'm going to ask the big question first, if I may.
Hit me.
What drives you, Kieren, to write something so bold and unconventional?
Well, the truth is, I'm not driven to write things that are bold and unconventional. I'm just driven to write great stories that come from my heart. But the thing is, if you're writing just from your heart, the odds are you're not going to go down the beaten path that you're quote unquote supposed to, and you might come up with something unconventional. So I'm not necessarily trying to do it. I'm just trying to express myself. But in expressing myself, the stuff I make happens to be wildly unconventional, if you see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Jack Kerouac who said, "No surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader," or something to that effect. And I feel like you as a writer are able to do that because you are capturing this authenticity and you're bold and audacious. And maybe we need more of that in our world today. So let's talk about it. N-Word, this book is not for the faint of heart. Can you, in your own words, give us a lay of the land and describe what this book is about?
Well, you did a very good job of describing it in your introduction. But essentially, as you said, yes, it's about Antonia. Now, she is an 85-year-old white woman who has secretly always wanted to be Black. She grew up in America in the civil rights movement, and she had a Black boyfriend. And this was in the 1950s and 60s when a white woman and a Black guy couldn't be in a relationship together, but they were, and they were very much in love. And he was ripped away from her, which caused her massive amounts of pain because her relationship with this guy was the only real source of love that she'd ever had. That pain carried her throughout her entire life until in the present day, she ends up being reincarnated for reasons that you'd find out in the book, in the body of Cara, who is a 23-year-old OnlyFans and Instagram model. The book itself follows Antonia in two different time periods. The first time period is in the 50s and 60s in her original body. The second time period is in Cara's body in 2024. And it's, like you said, it blends genres because in Cara's body, it morphs into an erotic thriller. erotic / an actual psychological thriller as well, where she's dealing with the trauma of an online stalker. But in the 50s and 60s, it's a political thriller in which she is taking part in the civil rights era and actually working with Malcolm X. So the book is effectively about two different women, but it's the same soul inhabiting two bodies in two time periods.
I think that's what makes it so bold, is because you've got all of this going on. So I'm going to ask you, and we're going to unpack all of that. We're going to unpack race and identity. We're going to touch on the love story and spiritualism. But first, I'm going to ask the question and challenge you a little bit, because there's folks in the world who support own voices. We support own voices, people writing in their own voice, but you've chosen to write from the female perspective, and you're a dude, right? So tell us, why did you write from a woman's point of view?
Okay, so firstly, that comes from my mother's influence. So my mum is probably the closest person to me in the world. And she's a very strong woman. And she's also the woman who taught me to read as well. She taught me to read well before I went to school. And because of her, I'm a writer. I'm not a writer without her. And because of her influence, I've always been kind of drawn to women who have their stuff together, so to speak. So that's part of it. Another part is, it's like, I think what the world needs more of is empathy. And to say that a old white man can't write about a young black man or a young Indian woman because he isn't that person, you're saying that you shouldn't even try to understand what it might be like to live in someone else's shoes. So you're robbing people of the incentive and the inclination to try and empathize with people who aren't necessarily like them. But I feel like all that does is create division. And another thing I think is, well, human beings were 99.9% the same. It's white families worry about their children getting home safe from school, just like Chinese families do. Black people worry about how they're perceived socially, just like Russian people do. Everything is more or less the same, but then there's like a 0.1% of difference, which we fixate on and act like, oh my God, it's so huge. Actually, we're all having the same experiences. So I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think that feeds into the spiritual, the aspects of reincarnation, which I want to get to. But first, let's talk about race and identity, because race is, can you talk about race as a construct? Let's put it out there like that.
Well, okay. So I think it's all a load of BS, essentially. I think that you essentially are whatever you were around when you were growing up. And let me explain what I mean. So, okay, I am clearly black, right? So I am ethnically of African descent, which means I've got certain biomarkers and maybe some genetic tendencies, whatever. However, the story of me being a black man, which means I need to listen to certain types of music and walk a certain way and talk a certain way and have certain interests and apparently love watermelon and love chicken but not be able to swim. Like, that's a story. It all is. And that's basically what I'm addressing in this book. So in this book, Antonia, she is white, but because of her formative years and the deep connection she formed with black people, she connects with them more than she does with white people, especially due to the horrible racism that she saw in the 1950s and 60s. But yeah, to answer the question, it is actually a story, and who you are is what you've been around, what you've experienced. I guess that's what I'm saying in the book.
Yeah, and from my understanding too, Antonia is based loosely on a real historical figure, a real person who did work with Malcolm X. Do you want to talk about the historical aspect of it a bit?
It wasn't really historical. Okay. Antonia, number one, she's named after my ex, who I'm still quite close with. Yeah, that's number one. So there's actually a real Antonia there. But number two, to answer your question, she wasn't based on a historical figure. What it was is this. Malcolm X once said that a white woman approached him and said, what can I do as a white woman to help you in your organization? And he said, nothing. And he just shooed her away. And he always looked back on that and he was like, oh, you know what, that was a bad move. Actually, there's a million things this white woman could have done to help. I shouldn't have done that. And I always remembered that. They even put that in the Malcolm X film with Denzel Washington. I was like, what if in some alternate reality that white woman refused to give up and she forced him to make him work with her? So there's that. Another mild inspiration is, so anyone listening to this is going to remember Rachel Dolezal. Now, for people who don't know, she was a white woman who was telling everyone that she was black, and I forget the name of the black charity that she worked for, but she worked for some black charity, and she was quite high up there, and she was working to make black people's lives better. But she lied, and she wasn't actually black. Now, I don't profess to know a huge amount of her story, but what I saw was some woman is like, I think black people are so awesome, I want to be one of them. And I think they're so awesome that I'm actually going to dedicate my life to making things better for them. And I never understood why everyone hated her so much. I never got it. Like, I could get why white people would be annoyed because it's like, oh, you're leaving us to go to them. All right, okay, I get that. But I never saw why black people were so mortally offended. It's like, that's a compliment. You know what I mean? That's a big compliment. I never got it. So that part of it as well, really.
All right. You have such a unique perspective because of all the things we've just discussed, but also you're from the UK. You're a British writer. You're a British man who happens to be of African descent. By the way, I just got to ask you, do people refer to you at all ever as African American? And you're like, wait, I'm not American?
No, I mean, no, never. No one's ever said that to me once. No. In the UK, African American is just black, basically.
Right. But that's one of those things. In the US, we're conditioned to say African American. And I always wonder, well, there's black people from other places besides Africa, and there's black people that live in other countries. And so I'm curious about your perspective that you bring as a British writer who's observing American. What can you tell Americans about themselves that you've observed?
All right. So what I'll say is this. I consume more American culture than English culture, and I have done for my whole life. I'd say it's about 75-25 or maybe even 80-20. So I am quite well versed in American culture. What I'll say is this. As a kid, up until when I was about 18, 19, when September the 11th happened, Americans had this swagger about them. It was this like innate knowing that we're Americans and we're the best, right? And nobody even comes close. There was just no doubt. It's like, is the sky blue? Is grass green? Are Americans the best? Yes, we are. However, nowadays, that seems to have flipped. Now I see that Americans are largely kind of ashamed, really. And they don't have the same confidence about themselves and about being American that they used to do, which I think is a bit of a shame, but I do understand where that comes from.
Yeah. Well, we recently had an election too that's, I think, going to start adding back to that again for what it's worth. There are different forces in the US and different forces in the world that is polarizing people. So I appreciate you and what you're doing with your writing in trying to pull people together and let us all see that, hey, we're all the same so much on the inside. And the other thing that you're doing is bringing the spiritual element to it. Can you talk more about how spirituality and life's purposes influences your storytelling?
Influences my storytelling or this story in general?
How about we start with this story in general and then we can go broad.
Well, what's interesting is you're making me look at my own work in a new way. I'm appreciating this book from a new angle as a result of speaking to you. So thank you for that. So in my books, firstly, all of my books are in the same universe. So every single one of my books is in the same world. And there's actually a character who features in every book I've written and every book I will ever write as well. That's one thing. A theme that I am playing with is something that I wouldn't go as far as to say I believe in, because it might be wrong, but I'm like 85% sure it's right, and I want it to be right, which is that we are all kind of immortal souls just living life after life after life. And essentially, the world is like a gigantic school where our souls are placed here to learn various things that our souls need to learn in order to grow and ascend to another level. And that features in all of my books, like this book especially. So, for instance, when people die in my books, it isn't necessarily the end. It's not like the person dies and then, oh, that's it, they're completely written out of it. Like, they can still feature in the story or in another one because maybe you're now speaking to their spirit. So my books and this book itself, they're not just in this world. They're not just on planet Earth. This book frequently goes into other metaphysical, spiritual realms as well. When Antonia is having sensual experiences, they're depicted in a spiritual way, and her soul leaves her body and goes to another plane of existence. When people die and cross over to the other side, you travel with them to the other side and experience what that place is like. It's not just in planet Earth with people having jobs and mortgages and going to the gym. There's a lot more underneath the surface.
Yeah, there definitely is a lot more to this universe than going to the gym and grocery shopping.
Definitely.
And you're touching on something that I think is really fascinating, this idea of the sacred feminine, this sacredness in sensuality and sexuality. Can you unpack that a little bit more for us? I mean, what is this idea about women? Why is the feminine so special?
Okay. Here's what I will say to this. This is what I'm about to say is going to really appear in my next book. The next book is really going to elaborate on this, but I had a conversation with a female friend once who said to me, Kieren, the thing about us women is we're really special because we're the gateway between the physical world and the spiritual world. Babies come out of us. I was like, I like the sound of that. I mean, if you assume that it's right in that there's another realm where all souls exist and then souls manifest here through physical bodies, they're coming through women. So women are that gateway. That would make a lot of sense. There's something about that I like. And I don't know a huge amount about things like Tantra. I do know some, but like Tantra is this idea of really connecting with a human being in a sensual way and by harnessing these sorts of energies. Now I'm trying to keep this PG. I'm trying to keep this as PG as possible.
Thank you.
But I have noticed that women seem to be attuned to certain sorts of energies much more so than men. And I'm aware of certain practices in which people are able to do things like manifest health or wealth or things like this by using these sort of sensual energies. And I am playing with the idea that women have this innate ability to communicate with the divine through the medium of sensual energy in order to bring things into existence or in order to access higher realms of existence. That is a theory or a thought or an idea that I'm playing with in this novel and will really expand on in the next novel.
That's fascinating. And you're touching on something that exists in a lot of cultures, a lot of ancient cultures. If you go way, way back and you look at even Neolithic totems and items that they've uncovered, a lot of times it's the female form, right? There was this idea that our ancestors had about the feminine that it does seem like we've lost in many ways in our modern day society. So
I'm not an expert, but I suspect that was deliberate. And again, that will feature in the next book.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I don't think it's an accident at all.
Yeah. That's, I think, one of the things that makes your writing so thought-provoking is because you're weaving in things that are just true. So these are social issues that are relevant today. And to your point, it doesn't seem like it's an accident, but underneath it all, we're spiritual being. And hey, by the way, thank you for keeping this show on the PG level, but you weave in instances that are a little bit on the steamy side because, hello, this is the real world. And in the real world, sometimes our lives get a little steamy, but yet at the same time, that's not the sole purpose of the book. Underneath it all, it's a love story, right? It's about that connection people feel. Can you talk about the love story element of this book?
Okay, so essentially, Antonia, the protagonist, she is in love with Winston. Winston is the absolute love of her life. He's the black boy that she was with in the 50s and 60s. After something terrible happens to him, they're split up and she never sees him ever again. And he plays on her mind constantly throughout the book, constantly. He's a figure who doesn't necessarily appear in the book that much, but the energy of him, the spectre of him, his presence, it just looms constantly. And when she's thinking about him in the 50s, she's thinking about him in the 60s, she's thinking about him in 2024 when she's in the body of the black OnlyFans model, constantly. And their connection was far deeper than just sex. It isn't. You hear about soulmates. If there's ever soulmates, that's what these two are. She would do anything for this guy, which is seen in the book. If you read the book, you will see there's situations where it's her deep love for him is absolutely put on display, but his for hers as well. He is her person, she is his person.
That idea of soulmates. I got to ask you, Kieren, do you have a soulmate?
Not that I know of. However, okay, if I'm wrong with this now, I'm going to seem like a fool for saying this, but I met someone quite recently, and we were having some conversations actually today where we're like, oh my gosh, how are we both intuiting so much about each other? This is really weird and crazy. Watch this space. I don't know.
There are some folks who believe we have more than one soulmate. So it's maybe she is one of your soulmates. Maybe she is the one and only. And you're right. Time will tell when it comes to that. All right. I'm curious. We do have a lot of folks who watch and listen to the show who they themselves are wondering if they could be a writer one day, if this is something they could do. So I'm curious, especially as you manage so many different genres and themes in your writing, do you have any advice to other writers or to somebody who's thinking of putting pen to paper and crafting their own story that might have similar themes as your own?
I suspect that, firstly, we're speaking about people who want to write but have never done so. Is that right?
Yeah.
I suspect that anybody who wants to do something and has like an itch or a calling to do something would probably be good at it. That's a suspicion I have, either because I think that calling comes from a natural ability, or at the very least, you are so passionate about it that you will try hard enough to get good at it. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is you literally just do it. It's like there's no rules. Art isn't like, I don't know, international congress where there's all these like checks and balances of things that need to be done. It's just you create from your heart and people either like it or they don't. But creativity is the opposite of fear. Creativity is about bravery. It's about you have an idea and you realize the idea, and you put it out there into the world, and maybe people like it and maybe they don't. But to the person who's actually watching, who's like, oh my gosh, I want to write the great American novel. I always used to hear that on TV. I want to write the great American novel, but I'm scared. Well, just realize that you're going to die one day. And you know what? Maybe I'm wrong, and this is actually the only life you have. And at some point, right, you're going to be 85, 90 years old, and you're in a nursing home, and your body's broken, and you don't have the ability to write anything now because your brain doesn't work properly, and you're just tired and shattered. And you're like, oh my gosh, I really wish I'd have done it. So just do it, because that version of you is screaming at you now, calling you an idiot for not doing it. And yeah, it ain't going to be that bad. Like, okay, let's say you write the novel and it's rubbish. All right, well, okay, it was a rubbish novel. It ain't that big of a deal. So now you got me on a bit of a tangent, but one more thing I want to say is adults are terrified of like sucking at things, which is what differentiates children from adults. It's like if children were like adults, children would never learn to walk because they'd be too scared of like putting one foot in front of the other, falling and embarrassing themselves in front of their parents, so they'd never try. But kids, they try to walk and they fall, they try, they fall, and they just keep trying and then they learn to walk. Then at some point we reach an age where we go, oh, if I do something and I don't nail it, then I'm a loser. So I can't actually risk that rejection or that failure. So now I should just do nothing. I think that's a terrible thing. I think just risk the failure. It ain't even a risk. Just do it. So that's what I'd say.
I like this idea that you're bringing out, that creativity is being brave. And if that is the case, and I'm with you on that, Kieren, I believe that's true, then you, my friend, are one of the most fearless people that I know, because your writing, your books, and your messaging, everything is absolutely brilliant. Thank you for being on the show with us today. Can you let folks know where they can go to find you online, to find out more about you, find your books, all of your details, please?
Well, I can indeed. Thank you. So it would be KierenPaulBrown.com. So that's KierenPaulBrown. And it would also be at Instagram, or on Instagram, at KierenPaul-Brown. And yeah, even though my name is Kieren Paul, nobody actually calls me Kieren Paul except for my mum when she's annoyed at me.
I love that. And a shout out to your mom too, for being such an influence on you. And I think you mentioned that she was even one of your beta readers for the book, kind of giving you a little bit of sage advice. I want to say thank you to your mom for raising such a magnificent son as well. Let her know that, okay?
Well, I'll make sure she watches this. Yeah.
Please do. Thank you, Kieren. Appreciate you being with us today. And I thank everybody else for joining the show, for watching and listening. Make sure you check out our website. That is booksthatmakeyou.com. You can find us on Instagram as well. We're on Facebook, TikTok. I'm still on X. I don't know. I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to hang out there, but you can find me there. And when you're on YouTube too, please do us a favor and subscribe. Ring the bell so you get notifications. It really helps grow the channel so that we can reach more readers and writers around the world. And when you're on the Books That Make You website, be sure to sign up for our Webby Award-winning Books That Make You newsletter. Every month, delivered directly to your inbox. You'll get news about authors like Kieren. There's giveaways, contests, and so much more. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today.
The host and executive producer of the Books That Make You show is Desiree Duffy. Sound mastering and engineering by Dave Napox. Social media and content promotion by Siddhi Jahagirdar. Copywriting and editing by Mike Robinson. The Books That Make You show is an award-winning podcast produced by Black Chateau Enterprises.